All right, Shalom. All praise to the Most High, Yahweh, by Hashem, Yahweh by Hashem, Rakak Badash, and double honor to our apostles, elders, and bishops here at Great Millstone for teaching His truth. It's going all around the earth, and Shalom to the hopeful elect. It's your brother Atazawan. We're going to get into a real quick lesson. Just in thinking about the scriptures, and, there's this lack of understanding, especially to I'll say it this way for you Christians out there. All right, brothers and sisters are learning every day about the truth of the Holy Scriptures and who the people are, who the book is pertaining to. Okay, it's not pertaining to everybody on the planet. Okay, it's not even pertaining to all of the Israelites. So it's Sunday morning. It's quite early, but just thinking about as these people make their way to these harlot houses today to hear some more rhetoric by a so-called preacher. They don't understand who the scriptures are for, who the scriptures are talking about. And one of the things that came up in my spirit was, when we look at our Bible or our Holy Scriptures and we gravitate towards the 1611 version, though there were versions that were earlier than that. But just keeping with the 1611, versus a standardized King James Version Bible, what's missing? The Apocrypha, right? And you got Christians, all right, Israelites who are in that bullshit-ass church, all right, forgive my vernacular, all right, but you never think about all the captivities that the Israelites had been in, right? So you read the scriptures and they try to teach it to you as if it's all universal for any and everybody, so on and so forth, all right? But if you would just analyze what the scriptures are talking about, if you would just spend time reading on your own and doing a little bit of your own research, you'll understand the theme of what the Holy Scriptures are talking about, all right? And that is really, in a nutshell, the fall of the Israelites and the redemption of the Israelites, right? And the kingdom of heaven being set up on the earth. All right, so I just did a simple, Google search, and we'll look at it here, all right? Because many Christians out there, they have a problem with the Apocrypha, and they don't understand that it is the true books, all right, that have been taken out of what you would call your standardized Bible for various reasons. And I'm not going to try to make this all deep and long, but just to give you a simple overview, to go back and read and study on your own. So here I just did a simple Google search, right? And it says the Israelites, because I asked here, were the Israelites held in captivity by the Greeks? Because that's the captivity that you don't have between your Old Testament and your New Testament, right? Some Christians refer to it as the 400 years of silence. It wasn't silence. It's only silence because it's not in your Bible. You have to go and get it, right? Anyway, it says the Israelites, and here it says Jew. You see it, ish people, which you can't be a ish person if that's what you are, right? Okay. In other words, you are what you are. You can't be acting like something else. Okay. And of course, now we have to watch what we say and how we say it and all that kind of stuff, but you see it. Anyway, that's not the correct term. All right. So it says the Israelites were not held in a nationwide captivity by the Greeks. However, they were subjected. Let me see if I can highlight it. They were subjected to Greek Hellenistic. All right. All right. So you have to remember that word, Hellenistic. Greek Hellenistic. All right. So there were Israelites who were influenced by their king's decrees and so on and so forth. All right. Antiochus and so on. Okay. So there were Israelites who later on would be Hellenized. That's the key point. And that's what your Christian pastor can't tell you or won't tell you. Okay, so when we get to it, and I got the scripture pulled up, we'll get to it here in a second, of Galatians 3 and 28. So when it talks about neither Jew nor Greek, that's what it's referring to. It's not talking about all other nations, number one. And number two, why is it when Christians see that, they think it only refers to, the so-called white man? Well, the white man can be saved too. Well, what about the other nations? Why is it that you Negroes, you Latinos, you worry so much about the white man? You don't think about nobody else. You don't think about the so-called Japanese, the so-called Koreans. You don't mention them. You just worried about the white man. You see? But it's talking about the Hellenistic period where the real Israelites, the real Jews, were influenced and under the authority of the then Greeks. Okay? And that's a part of history. You can research it. So then the scriptures would be correct. Okay, to show you that the scriptures are true. Okay, so let's go on. It says, however, they were subjected to Greek Hellenistic imperial rule, military occupation, and severe religious persecution. Now, so that right there in and of itself, it deletes what? The first paragraph where it says they were not held in captivity. Yes, you are. When you have that kind of influence, right, over a people, okay, then you're in a captivity. They don't want to call it that. Why? Because it's dealing with the so-called white man. They don't want to say it was a captivity, but it was. All right? But, for argument's sake, let's just go on. All right? So it goes on to say, here's how the Greeks interacted with the Ish people. Well, they weren't Ish. They were the real deal. Right? You so-called Negroes, Latinos, Native Americans, although at most time, you can say that Northern Kingdom was pretty much gone. But, of course, there were remnants. Okay? Let's look at it here. Let's look at it here. It says conquest. Following the conquest of Alexander the Great in 332 BCE, Judea fell under Greek control. So is that not being in a captivity when you under control? You see how a lot of the times when you look things up, you have to look very thoroughly. Because they're misleading, okay? Because they don't want these people to be discovered as the wicked of the earth. All right, so this is why it was taken out of your Bible, all right, and not really in your standardized versions, okay? Going on, it says, ruled first by the Ptolemaic Empire and later by the Seleucid Empire. Initially, the Greeks allowed the Ish people to govern themselves and practice their religion. And again, you have to read between the lines, okay? Persecution in the 2nd century BCE, the Seleucid King Antiochus IV Epiphanes attempted to forcibly assimilate the Jews into Greek culture. So there is your Jews and Greek, neither Jew nor Greek. So the Greeks are referring to the Jews that had converted and took on the ways of the heathens, the filth, the nastiness that these people have, all right, because that's who they are. They're the wicked of the earth. So Jews fell into doing the things that they do, just like you see these Negroes today in Babylon. They're citizens of Babylon doing the wickedness of Babylon. It was the same thing back then, but under the Greeks, all right, or under the Greekish laws, all right. He outlawed Ish practices such as observing the Sabbath and circumcision, and desecrated the Second Temple. Okay, so you could go on and look at the rest of this. Matter of fact, let's just go ahead and read this little portion right here. It says the revolt, this oppression, right? It's oppression. Again, canceling out that first paragraph that we read where it said no, they weren't, but it goes on to verify that they were, okay, in a captivity. The oppression sparked the Maccabean revolt in 167 BCE. The Ish rebels, which is not really talking about those that you see today, it's talking about the real Jews, okay, successfully defeated the Greek armies and reclaimed the temple in 164 BCE, an event celebrated annually by Hanukkah, right? Um, that's pretty much it on that. Okay. So let's see if we can get out of this and go over here. We'll go to Daniel, the second chapter. And we're not going to read this, but we're just going to show it. All right. It says, let's go down here. Salakia. Here's the king's dream. All right. It breaks down the dream. Then it tells you the interpretation. Babylon, the first kingdom. Right. It goes on to tell you. Then it says the Medo and Persia. Right. And Greek, or the Greece. You see? So that's two captivities right there. Right. In the dream. And then later it will be Rome. All right. And that's what you have still yet today. Okay. So those four major captivities. And the Greek or the Greece is one of them. You see? So you can't dispute the scriptures. All right? Now, quickly, we'll go over to, let's see here, Ezra. All right? And it reads a little bit here. We'll read a little bit of this because, there are those that say, well, the Apocrypha is not canon. Well, you go back and see who canonized what books that you have, all right? Okay. Anyway, it says here in Ezra 6:1, then Darius the king made a decree, and search was made in the house of the rolls where the treasures were laid up in Babylon, and they were found at Achmethiah in the palace that is in the province of the Medes, a roll, and therein was a record thus written. In the first year of Cyrus the king, the same Cyrus the king made a decree declaring the house of the Most High at Jerusalem, let the house be builded, the place where they offered sacrifices, and let the foundations thereof be strongly laid, the height thereof 80 cubits, and the breadth thereof 80 cubits. All right, and then it goes into what it was going to be built with and like and so on. All right, and let's drop down to verse 7, and it says, let the work of the house of the Most High alone, let the governor of the Jews, right, and the elders of the Jews build this house of the Most High in his place. Moreover, I have made a decree what ye shall do to the elders of these Jews for the building of this house of the Most High, that of the king's goods, even of the tribute beyond the river, forthwith expenses be given unto these men, that they be not hindered. All right. And so essentially it goes into us being able to rebuild our temple, okay, with the permission of the king. All right. And then Darius went on and acknowledged it. So when you drop down verse 12, and it says, and the Most High that had caused his name to dwell there destroyed all kings and people that shall put to their hand to alter and to destroy this house of the Most High, which is at Jerusalem. I, Darius, have made a decree, let it be done with speed. So it goes into that, and you can go into actually the books of Ezra in the Apocrypha and read about it, okay? Now, let's go and quickly get, like I say, because there's always contention with Jake. Jake is hard-headed, all right? But that's an attribute of our people, all right? So I put in here, is Ezra the same as Esdras? And it says, yes, the prophet Ezra is the same person as Esdras. It's simply the traditional Greek and Latin translation of the Hebrew name Ezra, right? While the name refers to the same figure, the naming of the Salakia. Biblical books associated with him vary across different religions, right? Of course it does, because they don't want you to know the whole truth, all right? Ezra, the standard Old Testament book, originally written in Hebrew, is called Ezra in the Protestant Bibles. In Catholic and Orthodox Bibles, this canonical book was historically called 1 Esdras or 1st Esdras. Okay, so there it gives you information that Ezra is a true prophet, is the same prophet of Ezra, which we just read out of. Okay, So the Apocrypha is real, you see. But if you ask old greasy, slick talking preacher today on Sunday and ask him about it, he'll deny it, you see. So let's go over, because you read about this, the Hellenistic things that went on during the time of Antiochus, okay? And you really have to start in chapter 5, right? You can read chapter 5 because it talks about, well, let's read a little bit of it. I didn't want to make this real long. This is just something that was on my spirit today, being I woke up so early this morning and thinking about doing a lesson. I thought about all the people, what came to my mind, all the people that are going to go to so-called church today, all right, and they don't realize what the Greek captivity was all about, where they could read about it, all right. They won't even consider it. They won't even, question anybody about it. And in fact, the way things are today, you can actually go learn it for yourself. You see, stop waiting on somebody else to do it for you. But anyway, this is 2 Maccabees chapter 5. I don't know if we're going to read all of this. Let me see here, Salaki. What is it, 20 some odd verses? 27 verses. I don't know. Let's try to get through some of it. We'll see. Because we have to go over to chapter 6. All right. So here at verse 1 it says, about the same time Antiochus prepared the second voyage to Egypt, and then it happened that through all the city, for the space almost of 40 days, there were seen horsemen running in the air in cloth of gold and armed with lances like a band of soldiers, the troops of horsemen in array, encountering and running one against another, with shaking of the shields and multiplied of pikes and drawing of swords and casting of darts and glitterings of golden ornaments and harnesses of all sorts. Wherefore every man prayed that apparition might turn to good. Now when there was gone forth a false rumor, as though Antiochus had been dead, Jason took at the least 1,000 men and suddenly made an assault upon the city, and they that were upon the walls being put back, and the city at length make Menelaus fled into taken, Salaki. Let me read that again. In the city at length taken, Menelaus fled into the castle, and Jason slew his own citizens without mercy, not considering that to get the day of them of his own nation would be a most unhappy day for him, but thinking they had been his enemies and not his countrymen whom he conquered. There's always been wicked men amongst Israel. You had a whole bunch of shit that was going on back then. Anyway, verse 7, howbeit for all this he obtained not the principality, but at the last received shame for the reward of his treason, and fled again into the country of the Ammonites. In the end thereof he had an unhappy return, being accused before Aretes, the king of the Arabians, fleeing from city to city, pursued of all men, hated as a forsaker of the laws, and being had in abomination as an open enemy of his country and the countrymen, he was cast out into Egypt. Thus he that had driven many out of their country perished in a strange land, retiring to Lacedaemonians, and thinking there to find succor by reason of his kindred. And he and he that had cast out many unburied had none to mourn for him, nor any solemn funerals at all, nor sepulture with his fathers. Now when this that was done came to the king's care, he thought that Judea had revolted, whereupon removing all of Egypt in a furious mind, he took the city by force of arms. He commanded his men of war not to spare such as they met, and to slay such as went up upon the houses. Thus they were killed of young and old, making away of men, women, and children, slaying of virgins and infants. So a slaughter ensued, all right, behind the actions of this dude, Jason. And there were destroyed within the space of 3 days, 3 whole days, fourscore thousand, whereof 40,000 were slain in the conflict, and none fewer sold than slain. Yet was he not content with this, talking about Antiochus, um, but pursued to go into the most holy temple of all the world, Menelaus, the traitor of laws, and to his own country, being his guide, and taking the holy vessels with polluted hands and with profane hands, pulling down the things that were dedicated by other kings of the augmentation and glory and honor of the place, he gave them away. And as haughty as Antiochus in the mind, that he considered not that the Lord was angry for a while for the sins of them that dwelt in the city, and therefore his eye was not upon the place. He had, for had they not been formerly wrapped in many sins, this man, as soon as he had come, had forthwith been scourged and put back from his presumption, as Heliodorus was, whom Cilicius the king sent to view the treasury. Nevertheless, the Most High did not choose the people for the place's sake, but the place for the people's sake, and therefore the place itself that was partaker with them of the adversity that happened to the nation, did afterward communicate in the benefits sent from the Lord. And as it was forsaken in the wrath of the Almighty, so again the great Lord being reconciled, it was set up with all glory. So when Antiochus had carried out of the temple 1,800 talents, he departed in all haste unto Antiochia, winning in his pride to make the land navigable and the sea passable by foot. Such was the hardiness of his mind. and that's the pride of the Edomites. You see? Now they try to say he was Medo-Persian or whatever, but he was of the damn wicked. All right? Verse 22, and he left governors to vex the nation at Jerusalem, Philip for his country in Phrygian, and for manners more barbarous than he that set them there. Verse 23, and at Gerizim, Andronicus, and besides Menelaus, who worse than all the rest bear an heavy hand over the citizens, having a malicious mind against his countrymen, the Jews. You see, again, it was the Jews that were Hellenized under all of this hell, right, that will begin to go into abandoning their laws and then taking on the ways of the Greek, okay, which proves the point, okay, of neither Jew nor Greek. All right, going on, he says, he sent also that detestable ringleader Apollonius with an army of 22,000, commanding him to slay all those that were in their best age, and to sell the women and the younger sort, who coming to Jerusalem and pretending peace, did forbear to the holy day of the Sabbath, and taking the Jews keeping holy day, he commanded his men to arm themselves, and so he slew all them that were gone to the celebrating of the Sabbath, and running through the city with weapons, slew great multitudes, right? Because they were keeping what? They were keeping their laws, you see? But Judas Maccabeus with 9 others thereabout withdraw himself into the wilderness, and lived in the mountains after the manner of beasts, with his company, who fed on herbs continually, lest they should be partakers of the pollution. Now let's see, Salakia. Let's go to chapter 6, right? And so here you see, as it continues on in verse 1, not long after this, the king sent an old man of Athens to compel the Jews to depart from the laws of their fathers and not to live after the laws of the Most High. This is the Hellenization period, you see? And to pollute also the temple in Jerusalem, and to call it the temple of Jupiter Olympius. and that a garrison of Jupiter, defender of strangers, as they did desire that dwelt in the place, the coming in of this mischief was sore and grievous to the people, for the temple was filled with riot and reveling by the Gentiles. You see? Okay, so these are the wicked, all right? These are the Gentiles, right? And even if they had some of them mixed nation people around in there, okay, because they did all types of abominable acts, sex acts, and this and that, they are all Gentiles, right? But mainly wicked Esau, Edom, all right? All the way from Alexander all the way through, okay? These are those Gentiles, all right? So when you read in the New Testament, when it says Gentiles, when you talk about Paul, it's referring to those Jews who were in this state of mind that we're reading about, but they were Jews. And Paul's mission was to convert them, okay? Verse 4 again, for the temple was filled with riot and reveling by the Gentiles who dallied with harlots and had to do with women within the circuit of the holy places, and besides that brought in things that were not lawful. The altar also was filled with profane things which the law forbidden. Neither was it lawful for a man to keep Sabbath days or ancient feasts, Salakia fast, or to profess himself at all to be a Jew. And we can stop right there. You see? That's what that's talking about. All right? Let's see here. Let's go here. I looked up Antiochus IV Epiphanes was a Macedonian Greek king of the Seleucid Empire, not a white man. So they say, but they lie, right? By modern racial definitions, while he ruled over territories spanning Syria and Western Asia, right? And where is Israel? In Western Asia. He was of Greek and Persian heritage and belonged to the Hellenistic ruling class of the ancient Near East. You see? So going into him, you'll find here, let's see here. I have that. Because it does go into, this is Wikipedia, Hellenistic Judaism as they call it, right? All right? But you have to remember, they're not going to want to give you the truth. So you have to, again, read between the lines. Hellenistic Judaism was a form of Judaism in classic antiquity that combined Jewish religious tradition with elements of Hellenistic culture and religion. And that's enough for you to understand once you understand who the real Jews are. You so-called Negroes, okay, as we say, the Israelites, okay, because the southern kingdom were what you would consider the Jews, and the Israelites are the northern kingdom, all right? But here you see where the Hellenistic culture, as it says, and religion, you see? So it was mixed in, and they were forced to the sword, basically, to follow these ways. Let's drop in right here so that I don't go on too much longer. It says, over time, much of the Greek-speaking diaspora, or diaspora, right, and who was dispersed? The Jews. Was incorporated into the rabbinical framework by the rabbis. Additionally, it is possible that some members of the Hellenistic Jewry, right, so it's not talking about the heathens or the, quote, Gentiles that we just read about, right? Esau, Edom, okay? But who was Hellenized? Jewry. It says it right there. Were marginalized, absorbed, and gradually became part of the Koine-speaking core of early Christianity. All right? You see it right there. So you can go research that, look at it yourself, okay? So, which brings you to this. So when you hear a crazy, bugged-out Christian talk about there's neither Jew nor Greek, now you should have a better understanding of it. Let's just drop in right here. Now let's go to verse 26. For ye are all children of the Most High by faith in what? Mashiach Yahushua, right? Talking to those who were these parts of those lands under those Roman, what would be later Roman providences, but they still carried on the Greekish ways because they were not that far removed from it. 150 to 200 year period. They still held on to a lot of those ways. All right. Verse 27, for as many of you as have been baptized into Mashiach have put on Mashiach, and that's through the Spirit. Okay? There's neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither bond nor free. There is neither male nor female, for ye are all one in Mashiach Yahushua. So that's what it's referring to. All right? Don't ask a First Baptist church pastor to explain it to you because he can't. All right? So that's pretty much all I had to say on that. Go out there, start studying, do your research, all right? And get away from those people because they're not telling you the truth. All right, we're too close to the we're in the last days. We're too close to deliverance, is what I was about to say. We're too close to deliverance for you to be, as it said in there, dilly-dallying around. All right. So that's a light explanation or overview of why in Galatians 3:28 it says that, and that your standardized King James Version does not have the Apocrypha in it, but the Apocrypha is real. It is a part of the Holy Scriptures, and that's why in the 1611 you do have it contained in there between the Old Testament and the New Testament, all right, because the Scriptures are legitimate, all right. So with that, we'll end it right there, giving all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahushai, Bahashem, Chakwadas, and double honor to our apostles, elders, and bishops at Great Millstone. Shalom to the hopeful elect. Lord willing, I'll see you again real soon. Shalom.